The Food and Agriculture Organization's World Price Index fell in February, marking the seventh consecutive month of decline as lower prices for all major cereals more than offset the rising price of sugar and meat. Kola Masha CEO Babban Gona joins me now to discuss the food price trends and options for West African economies to stem rising food inflation. Kola, thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Let's get right to it. What do you make of this latest data from the FAO? We're seeing a seventh consecutive drop in, of course, the index. What are your thoughts?
Well, so I think it's broadly good news. I think the question is whether that's going to trickle down to Nigeria, considering some of our challenges around exchange rates. I think fundamentally, as a country, we are way too reliant on imported food, which we're fundamentally importing inflation. And so I think, I think the real solution will come when we're able to become more self-sufficient by fundamentally increasing our local productivity.
Well, speaking about local productivity, just looking at that same report, the FAO did highlight one part of the report where it said conflicts pushing acute food insecurity higher. They mentioned conflict in Africa and specifically West Africa, where they say that this is driving alarmingly high levels of the most severe phase of acute food insecurity in the region. Now, we know that you and I have talked several times about the problems, the issues in Nigeria's food producing regions, including the northern part of the country. I mean, as someone who works on the ground with farmers, year-long, what are you seeing? What can you tell us in terms of, is the situation getting better? Are we able to produce more foods? More farmers coming back to their farms, etc.?
Well, I think, unfortunately, there's somewhat of a downward spiral effect. So you see in rural areas, you see economic depression due to this low levels of farm productivity and the increased pressure farmers are feeling. And then that causes greater insecurity. So, and then it has a negative feedback loop that creates more challenges. I think, at the end of the day, the reality is this high food inflation that we're seeing as a nation, around close to 35%, this is being driven by, we saw last year, we saw the doubling of fertilizer prices in Naira year on year, went up, doubled, due primarily to the effects of the Ukraine war. And what we're seeing again this year is you're seeing fertilizer prices double again. So you've seen 400% growth in farmers, and fertilizer, just to be clear, is more than 50% of the typical farmer's cost of production. So you're seeing huge increases in costs by farmers, and this really is trickling down into this food inflation that we're seeing. So I think I think the unfortunate reality is oftentimes when these dramatic increases in costs come in, government's reaction is to subsidize and try and reduce the price, when fundamentally what they need to do is increase the purchasing power of farmers by increasing their access to credit in a sustainable and scalable way, so that they can buy the quantity and quality of inputs. Because farmers are so profitable at those prices, it's just that it really is dramatically impacting productivity.
But is there an awareness of this? I mean, what you just mentioned, increasing the farmers' purchasing power, being able to access finance. Does a typical farmer, is that something that is that an option that he would typically defer to? And how are they treated by the banks, and what rates do they even get this, financing?
Well, I think fundamentally, the farmers are ready and willing to make this investment, right? They've been lectured for the last 2 decades on the importance of high quality inputs and so on and so forth on productivity, but fundamentally they don't have, it costs them $500, $600 per hectare, and you're asking somebody who's barely making $1 a day to somehow come up with that in cash. It's just a non-starter. I think the unfortunate reality is agriculture, the food value chain more broadly is about 40% of GDP in Nigeria. Agriculture gets, anywhere between 3 and 5% of commercial debt. So clearly it's not getting its equivalent share, but I think there's a bigger problem where if you look at the economy as a whole, we are significantly underfinanced. Commercial banks are, if you look at commercial loans to GDP in Nigeria, it's about 15%. Sometimes it goes up to 17%. Compare that to a country like Thailand. It's 150, it's 10 times that, it's 150%. In China, it's nearly 15 times Nigeria. It's north of 200%. So you're basically the economy as a whole is starved of debt. And I think the reality is, unless we really tackle that problem, it's going to be quite challenging days ahead.
Well, and I know it's also challenging feeding 200 plus million people. And that leads me to my next question. How advanced is our farming processes at this time for our farmers? It was just in the news today, one of the governors in northern Nigeria launching a couple of tractors for some farmers. And for someone looking on the outside, it might seem that, what level of mechanized farming do we practice? But what can you tell us? Are we making advancements in that area too?
Well, Esther, it's a good point that you make, and I think oftentimes folks look at mechanization as really the path forward. The fundamental fact is that mechanization is great; it helps improve labor productivity, but it has a relatively modest impact on yield, which is actual farm productivity. So the key to really driving yield is the adoption of really high quality seeds. Access to an adoption of good quality fertilizers and other chemicals that help to enhance yield. And I think there is a huge desire of farmers to access these. The biggest bottleneck is really the availability of loans for them to do that. And I think, once again, the efforts to do this in the past have really focused on subsidizing either the inputs or even providing subsidized loans. And the problem providing subsidized loans is there's a huge incentive for those subsidized loans to actually not go to real farmers, right? But if the government can create systems where market rate loans are made available to real farmers, I think what you'll see is just unprecedented growth in productivity, dramatic reduction in food inflation in Nigeria.
Right. It's amazing how, sometimes listening to experts such as yourself talk and you talk about the solutions that are somewhat at our fingertips and, but we keep going round and round in circles, looking for solutions. But anyways, that's a conversation for another day. Thank you so much for your thoughts and your contribution today, Kola. Appreciate it. Kola Masha, CEO of Babban Gona.